Hello and welcome to the show, Mystery Go and the Feral Monk. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about philosophy, and this is episode number 6. It's coming on the heels of our last episode on mythology, in which we had our dear friend and new Copenhagen resident, Jeb Connor. And so it seems like that natural order of things that we're going on to philosophy next. And so taking it just at that, basic level and starting off with the rudimentaries, the way things shape up, it looks like people try to categorize the schools of thought into two separate regions. Basically, you've got your Eastern philosophies, and then you've got your Western philosophies. And basically, there are differences between the two, and there are also similarities. One of the things I think that we want to talk about is how we, as a human species, like to categorize and put things into nice little boxes, when necessarily that may not be the best way to give the subject justice. So we want to be sure not to do that. But the Eastern thought kind of centralizes around Asia and the Chinese, Confucian teachings of Confucius, and Lao Tse and Taoism, and Buddha, of course. And then people like to try to contrast that with the Western school of thought, which is more based on, the thinkers of the Enlightenment, and also some of the like Judeo-Christian values that kind of have found their way into the thread of the,
and to a certain extent, Greek thought.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Definitely with like Socrates and stuff. And then of course, like, Nietzsche and Freud. So yeah, some of the differences between the two are kind of, they want to pin the Western train of thought as more of an individualistic versus the Eastern, which is more of a collective. And to kind of completely digress from that, to bring it back to a personal level, I'd like to say that, in my experience growing up here in Greensboro, North Carolina, when I was in high school, we started reading about the Transcendentalists, and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, especially, started, opening my mind and my eyes into some more different ways of thinking. And so growing up, like I said, here in the South, I was a Methodist, because that's what I was raised, so I was raised in that Christian household, and was fine with that, didn't really ask too many questions. And I mean, the questions that I asked, it just didn't seem like it mattered. Why would I ask them if they're not really gonna, it's undisputed as truth from all the grown-ups around me, right? So yeah, I started thinking about that, and why would my way of belief, be more correct than a kid who grew up over in Tokyo, Japan, as a Buddhist? Why am I correct and he's wrong? Why is he going to hell and I'm going to heaven? So I just started exploring that more and more, and so I think that's kind of interesting, living in the West and learning from the East. And finding that I have more in common, I think, with that Eastern train of thought, which, seems to be more of a collective spiritual way of thinking. So, Mr. Monk, did you want to, you can expound upon that and elaborate upon that some if you'd like to? Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Had a nice holiday with the family. I'm just happy to be here talking over good things with good friends again. Excuse me.
Good.
Yeah, I think in society we do tend to generalize a lot of like um, our viewpoints about philosophy into sort of East versus West, and I think we're both quite aware that it's much more complicated than being able to divide things simply, and usually it's more of a utilitarian thing whenever we do something like that. It's more to be able to talk about sort of general similarities between specific groups and contrast them to um, things from the other group. I tend to think that generally speaking, um, they're very similar, but on the surface and sort of the in the way in which they are expressed, maybe um, the expression that they take on in order to communicate those philosophical ideas, maybe that um, can be quite different and quite varied, very colorful, very nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would be interested in my background, sort of like a similar thing. We together, in our young teen years, experimenting with psychedelics and other things, and coming across people like um, oh, like the Dharma Bums, and reading all of these like Hermann
Kerouac.
Hesse, Siddhartha, and um, running into Alan Watts and these types of people that had a very creative, sort of funky take on all of the philosophies of both the East and the West. And there was definitely some trains of thought that then led me a little more Eastern um, in my life. So I really got into yoga, and not um, yoga studio yoga with the pink mat, and everyone's wearing Lululemons. And I went and lived in India twice, and really tried to get into it, reading a lot of their um, philosophical and mythological and um, and so they have uh, some great depth to some of their philosophies. And one that I found really interesting was sort of like a philosophy that's sort of, and it's maybe also something that's maybe it's not particularly Eastern, but it seems like it anyway. I'm not aware too much in the West of something like it, where you have this you have a philosophy that's trying to get you to have no philosophy. There's like these really interesting paradoxes um, that come up in Eastern philosophies that maybe you don't find played with as much in the Western philosophical traditions, where you can you can actually, I don't know if it's if it's like a you send the brain into like a crash because you just feed it like an incomputable problem, like a koan, like the Zen masters in Japan with their koans, so that the brain actually stops for a second, and the effect is to actually get to the state of no philosophy, so to speak, no filter, no and so those kinds of things I thought were really interesting, because it's not about like trying to find something specific. You're not like searching for a specific type of answer or anything else. The philosophy is intended to try to get you only to clear seeing of what really is through your own experience, and helping you to realize that actually all the other things that are outside of your experience are fun to speculate on, but you don't really need to know any truths about them. It's super interesting, subatomic particles, or Western sciences, things, very interesting information that comes out into the details of the fabric of the universe. But but it has its place, and the more poetic side of our nature is also there, you know. And you were talking about previously, whenever we were talking on the phone, that for you it was also this draw to nature, um, and that you felt like in the Eastern traditions, and of course, you know, this terrible dichotomous way of splitting up the world philosophies, you know, it's leaving out a massive amount of cultures that, you know, should have their due credit. The Polynesians, the Maori, the um yeah, the Laotian,
Yeah.
uh,
Yes.
you know, Angkor Wat, and all of these other places that had huge civilizations with very high thinking. It's a shame, you know, that what did you call it? It's sort of like most people live by cliff notes. You
Yeah.
know, they know like, you know, a tiny little bit about a subject, and
The Wikipedia
don't
version.
really.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm faulted at that too. I mean, I just think that that's an observation. I think that I feel like we do. Um, yeah, so totally. Um, but yeah, why do you think that the main differences that seem to be outlined in the schools of thought? Why do you think that those exist? I mean, it seems unfair even to me in my mind to compare Lao Tse with Nietzsche, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can understand that completely. They are very different worldviews, but therein actually lies like the possibility, especially the more nuanced the conversation goes into, maybe even comparing those two people, the more you can see how both of them are approaching certain topics, you know, of certain existential topics, and certain um, topics that are relatively timeless in how they apply to human life. And um,
Yeah,
so, you know,
yeah. I mean, it just seems they're separated, by a time, and so
yeah,
I mean, maybe
and geography and
Nietzsche was
culture, and
born in Germany the same time Lao Tse was born in China. Then maybe
yeah,
maybe I could, like, my brain could wrap around it, but like it's
yeah,
so there's so many factors involved, with the beliefs that separate those years, and like the society and the civilization growth, and all the thinkers
yeah,
that came
yeah,
before,
yeah,
built on what the person before them, and just
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of times though we get you know, philosophy is supposed to be the love of wisdom, right? And a lot of times whenever we get into um maybe I would say, like, especially like people of a religious nature that become sort of disillusioned with their particular religious dogmas, maybe aren't able to see the deeper parts of their religious traditions, especially in that mythological sense that we were talking about, where they're representing archetypes and informing your unconscious to act in a world that is, you know, basically chaotic and uncertain. um yeah, I think when you were saying, like, how did these, you know, how did these things get started, and you know, I think, you know, geography, distance, all of these kinds of things are definitely different. They help mold the way that these questions get researched and thought about, and eventually perceived. Um, and I think they come out the same way that the mythology does, like we were talking about last time, that they tend to emerge organically and dynamically out of social sets. You know, those could be like majority sets, and they could be like subsets of a particular um, region or area or city or culture. And so they kind of like emerge into the culture. You have these mythologies that maybe have developed over a really long time, that are quite ancient, maybe before humans have really technically developed very much. But those mythologies then over time, then they're going to inspire further thought or further reflection on those mythologies. And so you're going to end up with like certain personalities that become almost like teacher personalities, because they've gleaned through those through those colored lenses. They've still managed to glean some type of pattern from reality that is like replicable and recognizable, and and so they feel that there's something that can be said about it, and they tend to then emerge into these like philosophical ideas, like placing the value on, in the East, at least in India, there's a great value placed on at a certain age as you get older, that you take, for example, sannyas, and that's where you willingly decide to go off into retreat and spend the rest of your life in retreat, and in very little company, and pursuing sort of um, mythologically divine practices and things of that nature. Um, that it's something that each person in their life should do, should give up everything that they have, should become completely selfless, and at the same time, um, even the Buddhist monks do that, where you're begging for your food, you're relying on the kindness of others, and sort of the generosity of God directly. At one point in your life, maybe didn't have that. There was maybe a culture of monasteries and things like that in the West that kind of offered that, especially in like the Middle Ages, and whenever life was maybe a bit gloomier, and if you were a parent, you didn't know whether your kid was going to have a good life or not, you would maybe send them off to the monastery. So I mean, there would maybe be something like that, but the quality is different. You're leaving as an older person who's actually becoming more frail, and you're actually leaving society to not burden them with your old body, and at the same time to further your connection to the divine before you pass on to your next thing. And so it's like a philosophy of living, it's like a philosophy of life. And so I think maybe out of those mythologies and those types of beginnings, these these philosophies emerged as ideas about how one can live their life, how one can experience their life, or how one can view their life, and that can be cosmology, or ethics, or
It
whatever.
seems to be like a trying to make sense of life, right? To
Yeah,
find
and to have sort of like a way to live it.
a way to live it in some kind of a meaning, some kind of a value system.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I think those emerge organically, and that's why you most certainly have the phenomenon, because you have it in every like branch of human endeavor. If any of these groups tend to gain any type of traction, they're going to be people who wish to try to manipulate those groups, use their emerging philosophical tradition or religion against them in order to control them and profit off of them and exploit them, like they already were before the new philosophy or whatever emerged.
yeah.
Unfortunately, you're going to
Uh,
have those corruptions.
yes. Yeah. My train of thought wants to go in a little bit of a different direction, and not too far. But I want to bring up Baruch Spinoza again, because he seems to be really relevant to what we're talking about. He talked about, and I don't know much about him, forgive me. I'm going to learn some more though. I'm going to read Wikipedia right after this, find some cliff notes. Anyway, um, he was talking about the duality of the mind and body, right? Similar to what I've heard Muji talk about. And I'm sure that's not it's an old concept, right? So I would like to explore that, because I know you know a lot about that, Mr. Monk. But we're not necessarily investigating the philosophers in this show. We're talking
Well, we're not doing
purpose.
I
of
think
you.
it was like Charles Eastman, Ohiesa. It was like a sort of famous Native American, the first Native American doctor.
Yes.
He says, his purpose in delving into these things isn't as an archaeologist would to pile up more dry bones on top of each other, with all of
Perfect.
these like biographies and things of these particular personalities, but that he wanted to flesh them again, to take these bones and give them flesh again. So in the sense that how does it inform how you live? I mean, that's what philosophy is. That's what we're really talking about in those things. And that duality, you
Yeah.
could say that is a very important um, type of philosophical approach to understanding life.
Now, more
There are you
thing
could
before you segue into it,
yeah.
and that was, my brain. I can't help it. It wants to like paint things in simplistic, um, images. And so, what if you could try to say that the Eastern school of thought is more of the mind, and the Western school of thought's more of the body?
You could, to a certain degree. I mean, you had like
Maybe it
in
was
the with the
start
Greeks, you had Zorbus, Zorbus, the famous sort of indulgent type of religion, or the cult of Demeter, and that took psychedelics in an annual um, sort of big um, big ritual for like yeah, it was something that you were supposed to do once in your life because it would give you a better perspective on life. But yeah, I think what you were talking about earlier with the whole duality, I think that's where you more have it. I mean, what you said about East and West is very insightful. I
Yes, I
think
saw it's
I
interesting.
think you hit, yeah, it's very
Maybe
interesting.
something to explore later. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as like duality, I think that's where you more have is you have philosophies that are generally non-dualistic,
Hmm.
philosophies that are dualistic, and sort of sometimes oddly contradicted mixtures of those type of things. Because if you have like you can maybe have maybe more than just dualistic. I don't know. I guess you do have triune, like you have old Celtic and Viking philosophical and religious ideas, sort of like of a triune nature of three being a certain potent number that expresses something about the hidden reality behind life. But um,
Even the Romans had
in general, the what I think most people's philosophies end up breaking down to is something like, in dualism, you'll have yin and yang, you'll have all of these do unto others as you have done unto you. You're going to have a lot of these kind of reciprocity, and you're going to have a lot of opportunity to fill that philosophy with things that are going to be more or less helpful in your approach to living. um non-dualistic philosophies are also very interesting in how they can come to see the world. um I'm still like I'm mostly interested in as we were talking about with Krishnamurti and stuff, is like, am I actually able, because all those things are so much fun, like all of the different philosophical ideas, and you can inform your yourself with so many possibilities of seeing and perceiving like the world and its meaning or its purpose, or your meaning or your purpose, or uh, whatever. um, but it's still whether or not it's possible to be free enough. This is where I think it's the Buddhist thing comes in, that it's not necessarily philosophical, even though you could say the practiced religion is a philosophical form of what the Buddha was trying to teach. But I think it comes down to more of, can I be free to see, to explore and to see for myself and to experience for myself, and not rely on conjecture and things like that to inform myself. And can I see that even philosophies themselves are going to be things that I'm choosing to condition myself with, and that in the end, what we're really talking about, as fun as they are to explore, as fun as mythologies are to explore, as fun as religions are to explore, that they're basically, with all due respect, spiritual scenic routes. They take a little longer to get to the destination. There are more direct ways of approaching this problem of living a good and successful and happy and loving life. There are many ways to get to that goal, and none of those ways, if they're longer or shorter or better or anything else, that's not what I mean at all. But um, it is interesting then to always come back to that, which you could say is more Buddhist maybe in perspective, and maybe it's even informing my perspective somewhat unconsciously because I spent so much time researching all of these things. But it's just a matter of, can I be free enough to look at myself and my relationships and the world, and not try to figure out anything or try to make it fit into something, but can I actually just be present and just see it? And when the reactions and the things come up, can I just see them? Can I just be here and really hear in the most profound ways that I can be here? um, According to, also, I mean, there are moments in the day where you just can't be here, so, as much as is possible and have already experienced. But
Oh, I
and
know.
so that
You,
that problem of conditioning is always a theme for me, of like, you can have great grandiose philosophies for life, and they can actually lead you to live a very, very beautiful life, and and gain a lot from it. They're very helpful and they're very useful. I wouldn't want anyone who's benefiting from their religion or philosophy or mythological viewpoint to ever abandon it if it's working positively for them. But if you find yourself stressed by the challenges of life, and you would like to maybe have a few tricks up your sleeve to be able to deal with them whenever they hit, then you can remain deeply immersed in those traditions, and at the same time pursue some of these other things that we're talking about, where um where you're trying to see your conditioning for what it is. Also just for the simple utility of weeding out the ways in which conditioning left to run on its own will lead you into experiences that are going to be according to likes and dislikes. You're going to have um, you're going to be led around by these impulses that maybe aren't the healthiest for your development, or for your understanding, or for your emotional well-being, or for your physical well-being. I mean, a lot of disease can come from those types of tensions. So philosophies and things like that are good to get you into a good state of being, but um, uh, there is something to be said about like trying to find, whatever the truth, but as much as the truth can be, your actual uncolored innermost experience, you know
mhm.
unfiltered.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think philosophy and meditation and yoga and religion and all these things are wonderful tools, and we all need them at different times. Um, Not everyone, but um,
Mm,
and basically that. Oh, I just lost my train of thought for a second there. But but yeah, and basically that what we're, what you're trying to do is just open up that dialogue with yourself. And so that kind of what it's coming down to is being willing to have an open mind and to learn about, you know, these great religions and great stories of mythology, and the way, of course, like that we perceive them. um, it's going to start when you start having that inner dialogue. You're able to kind of to look and check yourself. And
You're also able to see those threads that actually unite all of those different things together. They don't seem so different anymore. You
no,
know, the you start to see the mechanisms and the similarities and the value in the stories as reminders, and then they don't become, dogmatic dogmatic have tos, but they become reminders of qualities that you can now experience deep within your own self and verify and confirm for yourself. um
yeah,
you know
yeah. And I know that we're going to be talking about thought coming up real soon. and and I think that that's a good next step to addressing what we're talking about, like why we think what we do. um why, because I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, am I a Methodist? And it's yeah, bringing it back to that. It's like I said, opening up, you know getting that base foundation built, and then going and looking inside of yourself and start questioning.
and that's exactly it. Like, what one of the things that you have to go inside and at least start to examine and question is, what is thought? What is all this thinking going on in my head? This, because whatever it is that's thinking in there, that's talking inside your head, is talking to you. So who am I? There's a value in investigating and finding out for yourself what is thinking. Because it's in a large part, it's that conditioning talking to you inside your head that most of the time is doing the acting in life, and
Mm.
it's on a reaction basis, and it's stuck on a feedback loop a lot of times and can get into ruts and can be very unreliable, and it's much more intended to be a servant of that deeper seeing than it is to be a master of it. um,
There's been
and
a
that
great imbalance occur that has occurred. You know, you got to
I
get.
would end it. I would end it maybe on the thing that I wanted to, the analogy that I told you,
I know. I didn't
that
know if you
came
want
to
to save
mind.
it for next one or not, but yeah, that would be awesome.
Uh, so I was thinking, like, sort of the problem could be described maybe in a sort of a silly kind of way, but you'll maybe catch the meaning out of it. Um, sort of whenever you go to a driver's ed, and so you're there with other students, so you got a group of students in the car and an instructor, and you're going to drive this car. You're going to learn how to drive this car. And so you could say, like, the analogy would be, the highways, is your life. It's the arrow of time. It's the direction that you're moving through life. And the car is more of the body, and you've got passengers with you. You've got people that you're sharing this journey with, and you've got, luckily for you, you've got an instructor, which doesn't necessarily have to be, uh, and you maybe wouldn't want it to be, one of the religious people. You might want to be somebody, be very practical in teaching how to drive a car. Maybe you wouldn't want too much poetry that you have to figure out what that's supposed to mean. And you would maybe want someone to be very straightforward with you and say, look, this is how you drive the car. And so you're on the road, and the weather's sunny, and it's not windy, so in moments like that, it's pretty easy to steer the car. Everyone's getting along. Everyone's having a good time in the car. The instructor doesn't really have much to say, but along that path of life, at some point the storms come, and the rain falls, and the snow, and that road gets pretty slippery. And because traffic had to slow down, it's pretty packed with other cars and stuff, and so you got to turn on your windshield wipers, so that you can see and continue to drive. And so you turn on the windshield wipers, and maybe at first, they're slow, they're just moving side to side, and you kind of have trouble, you're having trouble seeing through the windshield wipers a little bit, and you voicing your concern to the instructor, like, it's a little bit hard to drive, wouldn't it be better if we just pulled over and like waited out, the storm? And the instructor saying, no, just focus on the road. Don't worry about the windshield wipers. Just focus on the road. And so you continue driving, and the rain's coming down harder, and the windshield wipers are going faster, and you're starting to get more tense and nervous about it. And yeah, but please, can we please pull over? It's getting so fast that I almost can't see the road anymore. And you're starting to drive according to the windshield wipers. You don't even see the road anymore, and you look like a drunk maniac. And you're pretty much just avoiding catastrophe by sheer luck, left and right, steering this thing by the windshield wipers. And you're begging the instructor, please, can we pull over? These windshield wipers are so fast. They're so big. It's just, they're going so fast. I can't see the road. And the instructor just keeps reminding you to focus on the road. Don't focus on the windshield wipers. Focus on the road. And at some point, focusing happens. At some point in the time that you were learning to drive the car, the windshield wipers were no longer distracting. They're going. You need them. They're going. But at the same time, you're able to focus completely on the road. And that's sort of like an analogy for the mind to think over. Of maybe whenever you get to the point where you're able to transcend is it's almost become a dirty word, but like, able to transcend the distractions of your thinking, which is just that conditioning going on and on and on and on and on and on. So maybe we can delve a little bit more into that as we delve into thought next time around.
Sounds good.
What you think?
That sounds great. Perfect little end to the segment today. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Monk.
Yeah, man, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, hope everybody else is doing well and continue to do so. Enjoy that springtime, enjoy that sunshine that's out there, and take care of yourselves. Till next time.